say something about all of the stories that we've got here. If I was to tell you all of their stories, we wouldn't be here. We'd be getting home to about tomorrow lunchtime. I'll briefly talk about what this exhibition is all about. It's really to tell each man's story so that you realise they're not just names on a plaque. 100 years ago, they trod the same streets that we tread today. And they even have been walking and sitting in this very room. I'll just mention some of the people. There was Stanley Reming. He was an engineer who joined the Canadian forces, and he was present at the world's first tank battle in the Somme. The very first tank battle. Not all of our chaps were in France. There was Thomas Oaten and Richard Saundry. They were present at the horrors of Gallipoli. Ernest Bishop in the Battle of Jerusalem. I didn't even know he fought in that neck of the woods. Adolphus Lark, he was in the Italian campaign. Hardly surprisingly, many of our men were in the Royal Navy. Richard James Locke, Jim Locke, he was on HMS Highflyer, and he was the earliest casualty in those first few weeks of the war. He was killed in August 1914. Thomas Mutton, he was one of our earliest submariners. The first submarine in the Royal Navy was about 1905, here we are 9 years later, and he was one of the very first there. Jonathan Remmick and Richard Curtis, they were on HMS Monmouth, and there were 1,600 men lost when the Monmouth and another ship went down off Chile. Richard Henry Hocking on torpedo boat number 4. He was in Ramsgate Harbour, and they were at breakfast, and somebody accidentally dropped one of the torpedoes and it exploded. And there were 14 people who were killed in that explosion and in the rescue attempt to remove all of the bombs off the vessel. It was Valentine Charles Mitchell. He was torpedoed off Murmansk, right in the north of Russia. William Josiah Blake on the yacht Liberty, James Barrett Haynes on the trawler Ramindo, Frank Barrett on the trawler Valenza, William Honey Tann on the SS Hometown. And I was very surprised to find out that 6 of the people on 6 of the 13 had actually emigrated to Australia and Canada before the war. And they then joined their imperial forces and came back and served in Europe. There was Thomas Hill and Robert Masters. They were from Trelites, and they left separately for Canada. Robert took his brother with him, and they started a new life in Canada, and then the war started, and they served in the Canadian forces. And if you go up to Endellion Church and have a look at the font, you'll see this beautiful carved font cover. That is actually that was given by some friends of Thomas Hill and Robert Masters in their name. There was Richard Mitchell Bradshaw and George Honey. They went to Australia. There were 2 Remmick brothers. One went to Australia, that was Isaac Broad Remmick. And Stanley Remmick went exactly the opposite direction. He went to Canada. And in fact, there were 4 Remmicks who served in the First World War. There were 3 brothers and their cousin Jonathan. And only one of them actually survived. That was Thomas Blake Remmick. And he survived to raise his family. 20 years later on came World War II. Thomas lost his son in the Battle of the River Plate very early on in the Second World War. One of his daughters was lost in the bombing of Devonport. His youngest daughter lost her husband. That was William Townsend. That was Mark Townsend's father. And Mark was actually the great nephew of Jonathan Remmick, who was lost in the bombing. There were 3 Mitchells. Edgar Mitchell, he moved to Delaware in 1910, and after the war, his whole family left for a new life in America. Valentine Charles Mitchell, he was the one killed by a torpedo at Murmansk. Thomas Carew Mitchell, he was killed at Ypres. And his son, who never knew his father or his mother, because his mother died in childbirth, he was raised by grandparents in South Wales. But he came back to Port Isaac, and he's actually buried in the Endellion churchyard. He lived in Endellion for quite a few years, didn't he? Was it just a few last few years? I'll come back here. There were 2 chaps who were killed on the same day in the same area. That was Ralph Lark and William Oaten. And that was on the first day of the German offensive. They sent over 3.5 million shells in 5 hours. That's 200 shells a second. That anybody survived that is unbelievable. You're probably aware that many of the early battles had a great number of casualties. There was Samuel Reuben Worden. He was one of 23,000 people killed on the Somme in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, 23,000 people. George Honey. He was one of 7,000 people killed in 2 hours. 2 hours, 7,000 people.